quite realize at the beginning that culture was the piece really holding things back.
Wouldn't it be amazing if we as leaders also kind of de-risk each other by supporting each other?
Be true to yourself, be true to your own beliefs, be true to your own feelings. People couldn't see the need for change at all. Get some different people in, different thoughts, different ideas, challenging the status quo, challenging the way we were doing things.
How do you as a leader make decisions under pressure when the stakes are high and things are so unclear?
You lean on others constantly. I would always try and slow people down and take the panic out of situations, because generally that's when you end up making the better decision.
Welcome to Impact Legacy with Rania, the podcast where we explore inspiring stories of leadership and success and uncover the lessons that shape influence, credibility, and lasting impact. I'm Rania. Each episode, I sit down with leaders, visionaries, and change makers, from audit and risk to CEOs, entrepreneurs to senior leaders across the globe, to explore how they built trust, created value, changed perception, and forged a legacy of impact. Before we begin, please hit subscribe or follow and click the bell. If today's conversation resonates, please like, comment, and share it with your network. Your voice matters as we grow this journey together. So let's begin. Hello, I'm Rania Bejjani. I'm a global governance, risk, and internal audit leader. After a long and rewarding career as Chief Audit and Risk Executive, where I transformed risk and audit into a great success, I now advise boards and C-suite, mentor governance, risk, and audit leaders, and train teams on strategy, design, and implementation to strengthen and modernize governance, risk, and internal audit, elevate performance and perceptions, and create value and trust. I also speak at international conferences and webinars. My work focuses on guiding current and future leaders to develop the strategic mindset, tech savviness, and the critical influence and impact skills to lead with confidence and courage. Through my advisory, mentoring, and training programs, I enable organizations worldwide to build resilience, and I empower governance, risk, and internal audit to become trusted strategic business partners, delivering greater impact. I created this podcast series to spark ideas and inspire leaders, from seasoned board members to rising talent, to infuse more authenticity, heart, and joy into leadership, and to create lasting success, impact, and legacy. Hello, and welcome to Impact Legacy with me, Rania. My guest today is a remarkable woman, a globally renowned leader, a pioneer, a trailblazer, and a passionate advocate for inclusion. She made history as the first female CEO of Lloyd's of London, steering the 328-year-old insurance market through a major and global digital and cultural transformation. With over 4 decades of financial services and a damehood for her contribution to the UK economy, she now continues to shape global governance as a non-executive director on the board of a number of companies and the president of the British-Swiss Chamber of Commerce. Dame Inga Beale, DBE, what an immense pleasure to have you on my podcast today.
Oh, thank you, Rania. Thanks for that introduction. It's great to be with you.
My pleasure. The pleasure is all mine. I met Inga a few months ago, and I was so impressed with her that I could not have you on my podcast today.
Thank you.
Dame Inga, my podcast is called Impact and Legacy, and you certainly have had an extraordinary path creating your own impact and legacy. What do these words mean to you? How would you define them?
Well, for everyone, they're going to mean something different. Whether you've perhaps been in a professional environment, you've had a professional career, whether you've had another sort of path in life, I think impact and legacy can mean different things. Now, I've worked actually now over 40 years in the world of financial services. So for me, work has been so much part of my life. So when I think about the impact that I could have and what my legacy should be, I think of it very much in a work context. So what was I able to drive through the roles I've had in insurance? And that might be different for someone who hasn't necessarily had a career like I have, spanning 4 decades in financial services. And when I started working in insurance, actually, to be more precise, I didn't really quite understand the importance of what insurance did for the world. And it wasn't until I was starting to talk and actually encourage other people to join insurance. So I remember going to an MBA open day one day. So all these MBA students were looking for their first career, and I was trying to get them interested in insurance. And I suddenly started to talk about the power of what insurance does for society, for individuals, for governments, for economists, for the world. It sits behind everything that happens. And I realized that this was having a really positive effect on these people. They said, wow, I'd never thought of insurance like that. To me, it was just, oh, you go off and you have to insure your motor car, or you have to buy this because it's mandatory insurance. But it actually sits behind everything that goes on. Make sure that human progress keeps going forward, because every time someone has a new idea, they insure it to de-risk it. So I realized then that I was actually working in a very important, impactful sector, much more so than I'd thought when I joined. And that also helped encourage me do what I could. And also it became more broader as I got more senior, because then I realized I personally could have actually an impact and leave a legacy behind me that was perhaps paving the way for others, paving the way for women who are coming through their careers, paving the way for people who don't always fit, who can be a little bit different, perhaps opening doors to them. And that's when I started to get perhaps a more personal side of what the impact you can have on people is.
That is amazing and so inspiring. And 40 years, what a track, what a track. Now, you made history as the very first woman leading a deeply traditional, male-dominated, paper-filled insurance market, and you made massive change. This must have been quite a journey. What was it like for you?
You mean before I got there or when I was there?
No, when you were there. I mean, I guess you achieved a lot to get there, but like you get there and you are faced with this big challenge of the things that you need to do.
Yeah.
Talk to us, what goes in your mind as you realize, oh, wow, that's a big mountain to climb.
Yeah, well, I had already worked for over 30 years, of course, when I took the role on, and I'd taken on some challenging roles in my career. I've never been particularly risk averse. I love to manage risk. So insurance is all about managing risk.
Yes.
But in my personal life, I can be prepared to take a risk. I do things depending on how I'm feeling. I go with my gut instinct a lot. And I'd taken challenging roles in the past, which involved transforming things, modernizing things, digitizing things. So when I was approached for the Lloyd's role, I thought, oh, this suits my skill set perfectly, because I've done digitization. In fact, I gave up paper really at work, if I could, 24 years ago when I did a massive digitization program when I was moved to the US. So I thought I've got the right experience to do this. What I didn't quite understand was that I was going to such an esteemed institution that had got such a strong culture over the centuries. And because it was very successful, it didn't feel or see the need to change. And that's a much more difficult situation than I'd been in before, sort of doing a turnaround when disaster is everywhere and people know you've got to do something, the willingness to do it. It's like when the COVID pandemic hit. People were doing all sorts of things that they never imagined could be achieved. But when you're very successful and people are there going, well, we've survived everything. We've survived all the world wars. We've survived the sinking of the Titanic, because, of course, Lloyd's was traditionally insuring all the maritime trade around the world, and they definitely were an insurer of the Titanic. And so people are saying, we've survived everything. We're doing really well. why do we need to change? And that meant that there was a very big wall of resistance because people couldn't see the need for change at all. And so I realized I had to really get a strong vision out there and convince lots of people who realized, or who didn't realize yet, that the world was moving ahead without them, basically. Because when you're very successful, and Lloyd's, the size of the market at that time was about $40 billion, over $40 billion actually. So it was big as well, and people are feeling very confident. So it needed carefully managing the vision, and every piece of the vision had to appeal to people in a different way. So the finance people wanted to make sure that it was going to be, providing efficiencies and perhaps cost savings and things like that. Then people who service customers, they want to say, well, we want to be more innovative. We want to be quicker to serve customers. So each person also in the market, and the market in the UK, there were about 23,000 people that used to work in that sort of ecosystem around Lloyd's. So it's a lot of people, and you want to try and appeal to them and win them over. But what the key thing of sort of success and what I did, and this came just because this is what felt right to me, was after speaking to lots of people and understanding why they were a bit resistant, I realized that one of the things was they had not been included in designing their own future. So all the previous attempts to do this had failed. And they said, but you didn't really include us, you didn't ask us. So I flipped it on its head and I said, okay, I'm going to give power to the people, and I'm going to let you be part of designing your future. And suddenly the whole culture started to change. And that was an important aspect of being able to modernize and digitize, was actually the cultural change that we went through.
That is amazing. I want to hear a lot more about that. But first, conscious that we have a global audience, some of them may not really fully understand what is the insurance market of London and how it was. Would you mind spending a couple of minutes just explaining it to our audience?
I will. Sometimes Lloyd's is ranking as the topmost well-known brand in insurance in the world, actually, because it's so global for a start. But the biggest market for Lloyd's is actually the US. So it used to be that over 50% of all the business that Lloyd's had came from the US. So it was always very global. And in fact, the US was critical in Lloyd's development because lots of new things were happening in the US and they wanted to de-risk them. So for instance, the first motor car, Lloyd's insured. They insured the first aeroplane that took off, and a lot of these new things, launching satellites and things like that, a lot of this was actually being invested in the US and happening in the US. So the US was a big part of how Lloyd's grew and developed over the years. But Lloyd's history goes back right in what's called the financial city of London now, City of London. But in those days, in 1688, when Lloyd's was founded, it was a maritime centre, and it was near where the Port of London Authority was on the River Thames, and there was trade beginning. So there were merchants, there were ships' captains, ships' owners, sailors. Anyone to do with the maritime sector would be gathering in that area. And there were lots and lots of coffee shops. So sometimes I used to think the sort of coffee shop on the high street or, in our towns was a relatively modern thing. But no, it wasn't. In the 17th century, in this part of London, there were lots of coffee shops.
Amazing.
And Lloyd started in a coffee shop that was run by a Mr. Edward Lloyd. And he wanted to be the place where all the maritime people wanted to come and visit to get the latest shipping news. So they all used to gather, well, perhaps not all of them, but he wanted all of them to gather in his coffee shop. And then they realized how dangerous and treacherous the sea was and that they ought to start de-risking themselves. And so they started to sort of mutually insure themselves. And that was how Lloyd's started in the maritime field. And they just used to insure each other, share the risk. And Lloyd's continued to do that, but then it got into all these new product lines as the world moved on and everything new came along. And when I arrived, it was doing cyber insurance because that was one of the most sort of newest.
Still is.
Yes.
It's more important than ever now.
Yeah, but it's a very global business and it's a market. So it has hundreds of companies operating in it. Companies that take the risks on, and then it has companies that do the broking of it, the intermediating of that risk, and they'll bring risks from all around the world to Lloyd's. And then it has all sorts of other professional services and advisors, and whether it's sort of understanding modeling of risk exposures, understanding what the climate's doing for hurricanes and flooding and
How
typhoons.
amazing.
You know, it's quite amazing. And it's a very, very, very global business.
And I think about, like, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about the parallels. Wouldn't it be amazing if we as leaders also kind of de-risk each other by supporting each other? You've just given me a great idea, Inga. It is a really good concept where it's kind of collaboration taken to the next level, where people help and support each other to give each other a backing. Amazing. I love the idea. I'm going to reflect more on that. Back to your cultural transformation. I can only imagine how many challenges you faced. And I'd love to know, how did you handle them? And was there like a key moment where you thought, okay, this can be done?
There was, but you see, I didn't quite realize at the beginning that culture was the piece really holding things back because of Lloyd's success. And it wasn't until I started to understand, I've got to give power to the people. I've got to have the people involved in designing the future. Then when I
What an
looked sort of
important message
further,
that is, by
yeah,
the way. Let
but
me
then
just kind of repeat that. I've got to involve the people, include the people, and let them design the future. I love that.
yeah, but then when you start to look as to who you've got in the market, you realize that because of the history and the strong network and the way that they've been
Uh-huh.
sort of bringing people into the market, there weren't necessarily very many different types of people. So tech savvy people, for instance, didn't really look at Lloyd's as the place to have a career. They would much prefer to go off to a tech company. But
Right.
we needed tech savvy people to come and join the market because we needed to develop technology.
Yes.
So alongside this, including them in designing their own future, I realized we needed to get some different people in, different thoughts, different ideas, challenging the status quo, challenging the way we were doing things. And that meant we had to really make a strong effort at bringing new people in. And the other thing was, because it had been around for such a long time, there were a lot of committees, there was a lot of hierarchy, there was a lot of control going on, and we needed to free some of that up. And that
Uh-huh.
also was a big culture change, particularly in the central core of the corporation, where we wanted people to be empowered and feel that they could make decisions and they weren't sort of being stopped by an overburdensome bureaucratic environment. So we had to start shaking that up as well. There were many aspects to this culture, and shaking up the hierarchy was one thing, but also opening up communication so that people felt able to contribute, to speak up, to challenge if they didn't think something was right or wrong, or they thought something was inappropriate. We started to allow them to speak up. We gave them a safe environment to do that. That was a
Inga,
very important part.
Inga, I love this. This is like music to my ears. Again, as you're listening, I can't help but draw parallelism with my space. As you know, I specialize in governance, risk, and governance, and everything you said about shaking the hierarchy, bringing in new people, empowering people, trusting people, helping them, shape the future, opening lines of communications. This is amazing. Bringing the tech. This is amazing. It couldn't have been more timely conversation as actually uh, companies look to the future with AI. So I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So you've gone through so much change. And how did that change you as a leader and your leadership style? How did that Lloyd experience change you?
Well, I was very, very fortunate for 14 years to work for an organization that took leadership and people development very, very seriously. And now this was through the 90s and into the 2000s. Now, when at that time, there weren't a lot of other insurers doing this, but I was working for a big US conglomerate that had insurance as part of its portfolio, and it took talent management incredibly seriously, and
Nice.
it wanted to equip its leaders. But when I first got to be a leader, in other words, I was managing a team, a very small team of only 3 people, I didn't really get much support at that time. So I made some mistakes and I didn't understand quite actually how to motivate people and inspire people and bring them with me. And I made some rookie mistakes. But over the years, as I got more senior and I got more promotions, they put me on some amazing leadership programs and some amazing courses and learned about sort of empowering others appropriately, right? Because you shouldn't just be throwing things at people and empower them if they don't want it or they feel they're not ready. It's all about this appropriateness for those individuals.
It's a wonderful distinction, actually.
And I also realize as a leader, basically you have to, it's all about the people you're leading, and the more senior you get, the less you're actually doing tasks, And I just
That's a wonderful image. You're the maestro orchestrating people.
Yeah.
Love that.
And so I just grew to love that side of people, and people energize me, and that essence of being in a team and the team being successful. I guess some of that I might have learned on the sports field because I did play rugby for 12 years and that was a sort of ultimate team sport. But this idea and this feeling of satisfaction when you've got this team really rocking and rolling, is an amazing feeling. And then if you're the leader of it and you've managed to orchestrate it, it's fantastic.
That is so wonderful and so inspiring. And I think many people really need to listen to that because there's still many, many leaders, especially as you said, perhaps in the early part of their careers, there's still struggle between doing the doing and leading and orchestrating and inspiring. This is wonderful. Now, Inga, as you were going through all those changes in your career, not only at Lloyd's, but throughout your career, you must have had moments where, or maybe no, why shall I assume that? Did you have moments where you ever heard like that little voice whisper in your ear, I can't do this. This is too much.
Frequently, and it never really ended. I remember, even though I was the CEO of Lloyd's, one of the major markets in the world, I would go to conferences, and because there were hardly any other female CEOs, I would go to a big conference of CEOs of insurers, sit there, and I would look out at a sea of men. And that would intimidate me. Even though I already was the CEO of Lloyd's, I would feel intimidated and sort of think, oh my gosh, almost too nervous to speak up and to say anything. And then what I had to do in those instances was to think back to my rugby and think back to, even though you have a team goal when you go out as a rugby match, so the team has its joint goal. As an individual players, you have different roles to play within the team. And each one of us had to have our own specific goals for that match, because you assessed the competition a bit and you sort of knew who you had to maybe go and tackle and things like that. So I thought about that. I thought, right, Inga, nobody really measured you after the match. You measured yourself, and you were the one who knew if you let yourself down. And I thought, that's what I'm going to start doing. And that's how I started to cope with this sort of thing, was to say, right, Inga, I'm going to set you 3 goals in this meeting, this general assembly. You're going to ask 3 questions, and you're going to suggest 3 answers to questions that others ask, and you're going to make 3 points, and things like that. And then I would set myself these own goals, and sometimes I would not even perhaps be listening fully to everything else that was going on because I was so focused on saying this. But it was my way of gaining my confidence and feeling, that I should be there. I'd earned my place to be there. Yeah.
You're in charge of your own mind. These are very, very good tips, actually, Inga. So, you're the one who's judging yourself. Set yourself a measurable target, deliver that measurable target, and focus on that.
And if you fail a little bit, don't manage to complete it the first time, just get back up and do it again the next time.
Awesome.
This is what you have to do. And this was a lot. This resilience, this personal resilience, is also a big part of leadership. And when you're driving a lot of change, you need huge resilience, and you've got to find your own way of being resilient. What is it for you that keeps you going, that will mean that if you do get knocked down, you will be able to get straight back up and keep driving things forward?
Inga, when I first met you, well, I always remember when I first met you because you made a massive impression on me. You know, the way you carried yourself, you were radiating an aura of confidence and courage, and that was reinforced with everything that you said. And these are attributes that are so much needed today, and especially for leaders in these uncertain times. From your experience, what do you think leaders can do to amplify their own confidence and courage?
Well, be true to yourself, be true to your own beliefs, be true to your own feelings, show a bit of vulnerability, be able to genuinely speak from the heart. And often we work in big corporations a lot of the time, and we have to be mindful of what we're saying. Of course we do. And there will be corporate communications and perhaps the legal team also saying, what you can and can't say. But try and find something in what the corporate messaging has to be that resonates with you so that when you speak, it comes across as genuine, because the impact of that is immense compared with if you're just saying something that you don't really believe in. People notice this all the time. And often as leaders, we underestimate how smart people are, right? The employees of your organizations, and as we sort of underestimate them. And we've I don't know, cleansed messaging sometimes, and we should just be more open. And that's something that I've learned over the years. And I certainly wasn't even a confident speaker when I was all in my 20s. And when I remember having to give my first public speaking, presentation, and this was to a paid audience. So this conference this conference was a paid conference. People had to pay to attend, and I got up and I had to talk about fish farming, because I was insuring fish farms.
Right.
And I was speaking at a fish farming conference to a bunch of fish farmers. And I didn't really know much about fish farming because, of course, I insured lots of different things, and this was just one thing. And I was petrified, and I played rugby at the time, and I thought, oh gosh, I hope I get a big injury at rugby so I can't show up and give the speech. And I was so worried about it. But I did it. I prepared and practiced and rehearsed and practiced. And I got great feedback afterwards. And that gave me then the confidence to do something else and do it again. And so the more you practice these things, the more confident you get in them.
This is beautiful, actually, because what comes through to me as you're saying that is part of that courage and confidence is embracing our own vulnerability and actually being authentically who we are. I love that. I love that. And that resonates totally with me. Talking about uncertainty, especially today, we have so much uncertainty in the world. How do you, as a leader, make decisions under pressure when the stakes are high and things are so unclear?
Well, you lean on others constantly. Now, as the CEO or potentially the most senior leader in whatever setting it is, you are the one that has to make the final call, and you may have to make some tough calls. And particularly if you haven't got complete consensus around the group, you may have to make the call, which some people might not agree with, and the rest of it. So you have to have that courage to be able to do that. But the best thing for me, whenever something's really tough, lean on the people. Make sure you get all the ideas out, because it's only when you start having that something gets sparked in someone else and you come up with the right solution. And when things feel very, 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 very urgent, my advice is not to panic, because so often you see a knee-jerk reaction. We've got to respond right now. Unless it's life or death, you do not need to respond immediately. Take a step back, breathe, gather people, listen to them, get the conversations going, and then I've always felt ready and confident to make the decision. I would always try and slow people down and take the panic out of situations, because generally that's when you end up making the better decision.
Before we dive into the more people aspect of things, I'd love to get your perspective on today's volatile market. So we're seeing AI, regulations, geopolitical challenges, climate change, and so many things that boards and leadership are grappling with. If you were to, to put on your insurance, your board member hat on, what would be your tips to boards and CEOs and governance and risk and audit functions to strengthen the resilience of their companies in today's environment?
Yeah, you've just got to get as risk ready as you can, and but only around the things that you can really control. Because if you start looking at the whole scale of what's going on in the world, it can be so overwhelming. You just think, well, what can I do? What can I do about these economic wars that are going on? All the geopolitical uncertainty, the fragmentation of globalization, and the power base shifts that are happening in the world at the moment. If you try to think about that in the whole, you just get overwhelmed. But so you've got to try and break those things down as to what will actually be the impact on you or your business. And that's what we do in the world of risk. So we really try and hone it down and say, well, what would be the impact of that? And then if you can take mitigations, control that in some way so that it reduces the impact on your business, that's the way you have to manage it. And that's what risk management has been doing for years. And particularly at Lloyd's, Lloyd's was very famous for this. It would use all the intellect coming together. What are all the scenarios that we can think of in the world that could cause issues? And what impact would they then have on the insurance portfolio, for instance, that Lloyd's has? It sounds quite simple. It's not that simple, obviously. You need a lot of thought behind it, and you need calculations and numbers and things like that. But that's the fundamental of it. Yeah.
Inga, on top of your damehood, I'm going to give you an honorary ambassador for risk ambassadorship for risk management because this is a great segue to what we're going to talk about next, and it is amazing. There's a lot of talk about resilience today, but in my opinion, it's old wine in new bottles, and good risk management. There's nothing new about that. It's common sense, and it needs to be done as you so beautifully highlighted. I'm going to take that, what you said, and spread it to all boards to support governance, risk, and audit teams everywhere. So a great segue to what I would like to ask you about. I am on a mission to elevate the governance, risk, and audit profession, and really passionate about that. And what I see today is they're not always flourishing. So let's try to help them a little bit. As a CEO and a board member, what do you really want from an audit and risk function beyond what it says on the tin, so to speak, beyond the obvious job description? What are those things between the lines that if an audit and risk leader is listening to you today can think, aha?
Well, I'm just going to cover one topic actually, and that's about culture, because the culture of an organization is difficult to measure, really difficult to fully understand, particularly if you're sitting at a non-executive board level, and then you've got your audit and risk committee. But that to me can tell you a lot about what can go wrong and what you might not be being told, what might be hidden, what might be around the corner. And I don't think historically those sorts of committees or those environments have spent enough time on trying to understand the culture. And I think, compliance has a big part to play in this, really trying to measure culture if you can. And there are people who now provide tools for this, because that to me is the slightly intangible aspect of it. And I know in the UK, for instance, the regulators been grappling with this. They've been trying to think of mechanisms to improve culture, say at the top of organizations, by limiting payouts or having clawbacks in compensation things if someone's done something wrong. But it goes way beyond that. It goes to really the culture and whether people are included, whether they can speak up, whether it's psychologically safe for them to do that, how whistleblowers are treated. If you do speak up, what's the process? How do they get treated? That to me is a thing that committees should spend as much time on as they do of some of the understanding the numbers and whether the latest accounting reg has been adhered to.
I love that. One problem I see is that in many organizations, they still don't, these functions still don't get the right sponsorship, support, and visibility. So why do you think this is the case?
It's true in some sectors they don't. But having come from financial services, of course, it's way up there. And the chief risk officer often sits on the group executive committee because it's, managing risk and understanding that is as important as the CFO's role, looking at all the numbers. But I agree in other sectors it doesn't.
I advocate for governance, risk, and audit teams to become strategic business partners. I actually advise, mentor, and train and speak a lot about that. But I'd love to get your perspective. What would that mean to you as a CEO and a board member? And, what, in your opinion, those governance, audit, and risk teams should do differently to be seen as the valuable, impactful, strategic business partner?
Well, it's not just to measure and report on the things that perhaps haven't been going right, but then to come up with the solutions and turn it around. So take anything that's gone wrong or any challenge that we have. If you can turn it into an opportunity or a plus or whatever learning, that to me then means you can start to be really strategic.
Inga, we have a tradition in my podcast that you as a guest also get to ask me a question. And then I will move on to the close of our show.
Okay. Well, Rania, I would be interested to know, when did you first start thinking about what your legacy would be? Was there a particular moment, some trigger that made you think, gosh, the impact I'm going to have on the world has got to be big, and this is going to be my legacy? When did you first start thinking about that?
I was always kind of my authentic self, doing things the way I believed would be the right way. And I think it's only when I became actually a leader of people that I started realizing that what I say and what I do has an impact on them. It's not only about me and my result and my output. And then as I started speaking more and being more in touch with larger groups, and I get people come and say, "Oh, this inspired us," or "This, made me think about things differently." I started to think, "Oh, so actually people listen, and what I say." Can be a power for good or can be a power for a distraction. And I made a conscious choice then to spread the things I believe will do right to the world. And in my profession, it was always about building, stronger teams, having that strategic alignment, building a culture of collaboration and connection, relationships with the business and trust, and becoming that strategic business partner. And I actually think that I want it to be not just limited to one company and one team, but be able to help others. And so somehow it grew naturally. There is not one defining moment, but a series of things that kind of stacked up. To wrap up, Inga, you've been a fearless advocate for inclusion and authenticity yourself, leading as your true self. And I would love to hear your views and thoughts. If there is a rising leader listening to us today and feeling that they have to hide or repress part of themselves for whatever reasons, what would be your message to them? What did your experience tell you about the relationship between vulnerability, self-acceptance, and reward in terms of being a world-class successful leader?
Well, if you cannot be yourself for whatever reason at work, you for yourself, you waste some energy because you're always hiding something, and that takes energy, believe it or not. Now, I'm also from the LGBT community, and I would find myself when I wasn't out about that, when I was in the closet, I would find myself changing words, being very careful about what I said all the time. That, believe it or not, wears you down after a while. So every employer should be aware of this. Whatever it is that somebody feels they can't be talking about and they've got to be hiding, they should be aware that this can drain your employees and they won't necessarily have the right energy, the right motivation, they won't be perhaps so engaged at work as they should be. And that leads then to perhaps a lower productivity. Now, when I did come out, I felt a weight come off my shoulders. And suddenly there I was in the workplace, not having to worry about those things I used to worry about. And I became me. Mm-hmm. And I was so much more energized. I felt so much more energized, but also I was sort of more energetic and enthusiastic about work as well, because I wasn't being bogged down by something. And I felt I could just sit alongside others, the same as them, be open about myself, talk about my weekends, whatever it is. Now, when you've got a very diverse workforce, you've got different generations in the workforce. You've got different racial backgrounds, you've got different genders, you've got different religions coming into it, different cultures, different faiths. You've got a multitude of different things going on, as well as socioeconomic backgrounds, neurodiversity. There are so many factors to think about.
Political views.
Yes,
exactly.
So it's a really big thing, and it's a difficult thing for leaders to manage. But I think if you can enable people to not be critical of each other, but to be able to air their differing views and have grown-up conversations about this, to my way, that's a way of not just improving the work environment, but also improving a broader society. Because the more understanding you have about where someone comes from, the better you'll be as a person and the better you'll be as a leader.
Wonderful. What a great note to finish on. Dame Inga Beale, thank you so much for sharing so much wisdom, inspiration, heart, and making it a valuable insight for our listeners. Much appreciated.
Thank you for including me, Rania.
If today's conversation resonated with you and you'd like to explore how I could support you and your team with advisory, mentoring, training, and/or speaking at one of your events, get in touch. I'd love to connect. Thank you for tuning in. Until the next episode of Impact Legacy with Rania. Thank you for tuning in to Impact Legacy with Rania. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe or follow so you never miss an episode, and click the bell to be notified of new releases. If this inspired you, please pass it on. Your likes, comments, and shares help us reach more people, because together we can grow this journey of influence, impact, and legacy.